with the cattle handling, the main thing is to get the animal where they're not afraid of you, but will respond to you. And there's a real difference there. Fear, they just run off and they're not thinking about where they're going. But if they're responding to your pressure, they move where you want them to go and how fast you want them to go. Cattle, if they can see you and you let them respond through vision rather than noise or hitting them, then they'll start working for you off pressure. The next thing is you know, cattle are going to try to go to other cattle, or they want to be with other cattle, so you can use that to your advantage or disadvantage. And then the last thing would be, they like to kind of go where they're headed. They want to be straight and going in a line. If you can use those things and then add in the balance point, which is the point where the animal will stop and turn away or come on by you, the farther forward the balance point is, the easier the animal is to work from the front end where you have the most control. The flight zone, or what I would rather call as a pressure zone, that's the area where the animal starts to move away from you or respond to you. And the more precise and the more control we have on the pressure zone, the better our animals work for us.
That's my objective, is to do it smooth enough it doesn't look like I'm doing much. And that approach everything we do with those cattle that way, to make as small a movements as I possibly can. And that way I don't cause pressure on the cattle when they're not expecting it or I'm not expecting it. Because if I'm making big moves, I'm causing pressure on cattle I'm not even thinking about. And so as quiet and calm as you can keep it, and then keep your hands down as much as possible. Then if you do need to make some noise or throw a hand up to, you know, build movement in cattle, then it's a tool that's available to you. Otherwise, you keep your mouth shut until you need it. That's kind of hard for some of us to do.
When you're moving cows and calves, the driving aid, the main thing there is not to panic the animals and cause the cow to leave the calf or the calf to run off and leave the cow. We want to keep them mothered. And if we're sorting or whatever, we don't want to have this panic movement happening in our cattle. When we have that panic movement, that starts the stress and it keeps it going and it gets stronger and stronger. So rattle paddles, if you use them properly, that's fine. You know, sort sticks used properly without hitting the animals, using them to stop or just nudge them along, that's fine. Hot shots, I don't like them with cows and calves. They'll get you kicked, and calves, they'll never really get over that fear.
If you understand some of the principles of the flight zone, working the point of balance principles, and getting rid of distractions that make animals balk. Coats on fences, you don't leave this flag right out where you're going to try to drive the cattle into it. You've got cars parked by the fence, there's a hose across something, a bottle on the ground. These are the kind of distractions that can make animals balk. You need to get down in the chutes, see what your animals are seeing. Now there's a lot of facilities that, you know, even some, you know, very simple facilities that you can make work really well if people keep cattle calm. You get cattle all excited, it takes 20 to 30 minutes for them to calm down.
All the work we do in the corrals starts when you first gather them out of the pasture. And this is when you first contact those animals or run into their pressure zone or their flight zone. The way you get the animals to respond to you, like when you put pressure on them, you should let them have a chance to move away from you. You're teaching the animal to move away from pressure. Going out through a gate, you get somebody in front and you let those cattle work by you, and that teaches the animal to go by you, just like they have to do coming up into the chute. And they also learn to go away from that pressure. When the animals go under stress, they don't come into the heat as well, they don't breed up as well, and they kind of hide out. And we don't want those things. So breeding, AIing, low stress handling is real important to have high conception rates. AI is one of the places where you can learn how to handle cattle very well, because you single an animal out, you bring them into a chute or a breeding spot, and if you mess up, you got to go back and do it over again. When we're heat detecting or bringing an animal in to breed, if you start running them and chousing them and fighting them in, your conception rates are going to go way down. Learn how to work animals controlled and in a low stress manner, and you're going to have higher conception rates. The thing we got to really try to realize with our cattle, if they're out in big country in the open, they're probably pretty low stress. But if they're in a confined area like a grazing system or small pastures where they're being moved, or maybe there's a lot of activity around them, that can really affect your breeding time. A lot of bulls are real timid and they won't breed except in night if there's other people around or things. So really watch your cattle and make sure that the surroundings are not affecting the breeding program.
This may be an oversimplification about where people make mistakes, but to me it goes back to training cattle to take pressure. And that starts with pasture work and proceeds from there. There's certain things that we do that I think are all training opportunities for cattle. We don't think of them that way. Anytime we have a chance to get out in the pasture on a four-wheeler, a horse, or on foot, you can teach cattle to drive away from you and stop them, and all the things that you're going to need them to know how to do when you get in the corrals. The other aspect of that is if people call their cattle in with cubes or feed or hay or whatever, those cattle are not ready to work. And so often when we get them in to small confined areas where we can handle them, we go to pushing on them and they don't understand what we're asking them to do. So that's why working cattle in the pasture is so important, to teach them to respond to pressure and release. And then you can work down into smaller and smaller confined areas and it doesn't tend to bother them as bad. So if you've just trapped them or called them into a situation, they're not ready to work. And we see this in cow-calf operations, stocker operations, feedlots, every aspect of it. They tend to drive cattle from behind. And I don't know, if you notice in working the corrals today, I'd always try to push the cattle away from the gate that I wanted them to go to where when I get pressure on them and they could take the pressure off by going to the next corral. So I'd always push them away from where I want them to go and then release them. And it doesn't take much to do that. You just kind of step back a half step. But that teaches them, once again, that you're going to take the pressure off of them and let them go to where it's less stressful. And so every one of those opportunities I have to move them from corral to corral, out of the pasture, makes working them through the chute so much easier.